Welcome back to another beautiful day of living environment. We are officially on day 2 of Unit 2, so we're still talking about cells, but today's aim is going to be how are organisms organized. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to tell me, how are these organisms, or how are all organisms organized? So today's do now is a review of what we did yesterday, and that is, what is the name of the theory that proposes that all organisms are composed of cells? So write your answer below. Go ahead and pause this video and then press play when you're ready to review. So the theory that you should have written down is called the cell theory. And the cell theory does tell us that all organisms are composed of cells, but it also tells us two other things, okay? It also tells us that cells are the basic building block of life. And it also tells us that all cells, or every cell, I should say, comes from a pre-existing cell. So cells don't just poof out of thin air, they come from a previously existing cell that has divided itself into two. So all cells come from another cell. Now, when we say building blocks, personally, I always think of Legos. And it actually makes sense, okay? Cells are the building blocks of life, just like Legos are building blocks, okay? So let's take a look at what that looks like. So if I have a Lego right here, what am I gonna do with that Lego? Well, I could just let it sit on my floor forever, or I could go crazy and take another Lego and stack it on top. And then let's say I'm feeling especially crazy that day and I decide, hey, why not add another Lego on top? Right? And then suddenly, oh, that's not a straight line. Suddenly, before I know it, I have a full stack of Legos in front of me. What? That's crazy. Well, what do we do with Legos? Okay, we use Legos to build larger and more complex structures. That is not legible, is it? Let's try that one more time. We use Legos to build larger, wait for it. Larger, more complex structures. And since we're building larger, more complex structures Legos, we're actually doing the same thing with cells. We use cells to build larger, more complex structures. And we organize those different structures based on the levels of organization that I've got written down here. So what are the levels of organization? Well, we know that organisms are organized in increasingly complex ways. They're organized from least complex to most complex. So starting out with our least complex structure, we have our organelles, and somehow, we're not quite sure yet, but we're gonna get there. Those least complex structures build up until we get our most complex organism. Right, so let's figure out how that happens. Well, on your paper, you actually have two drawings that for some reason didn't transfer over to mine. So I'm going to attempt to draw them. Keep in mind, I can't draw, so please bear with me. Maybe we'll get a piece of art, maybe we'll get a piece of trash. Let's find out. So on our least complex organelle side, you guys have a picture of an organelle, and I hope you were able to figure out what type of organelle it is. It looks like a bean structure, and it was producing ATP, or energy. So what is that organelle? Well, I hope you said that that organelle is a mitochondria. Right, and the second picture that you guys have on your paper that I don't is an elephant. Now, let's see if I can draw this. Here we go. Ooh, ooh, ooh. That is, let's try that one more time. Okay, there's the head. Ooh. There's the ear, right? That's an ear. We've got some eyes, we've got some tusks, and we've got our body. Okay, honestly, it could have been worse. I'm not terribly mad at that. All right, so that is our organism. That is our elephant. Now, when we say organism, we're not always talking about elephants, obviously. We could be talking about humans or penguins or snails. Okay, those are all going to be organisms. So how do we get from organelles, like the mitochondria, all the way to organisms like an elephant? Well, that's why we have these levels of organization, to show the various stages of organization that allow these things to happen. So each of these components build up or make up whatever comes next. So for example, we know that organelles, different organelles come together to build up cells. We know that cells are the building blocks of life. So a bunch of cells come together to form tissues. And tissues come together to form organs. Organs come together to form organ systems. And finally, those organ systems come together to build up or create organisms. So once again, organelles make up cells. Cells build up tissues. Tissues build up organs. Organs build up organ systems. And finally, organ systems build up organisms. So we're going from the least complex, the tiniest structure, all the way to organisms and the biggest, most complex structure. But I am going to tell you guys a little bit more about each of these stages or levels along the way. Okay, so for example, first up, our least complex, we've got the organelle. These are known as functional parts of a cell. They work together to carry out cellular activity, so they each have a specific function. These are our least complex. And for example, let's go with the one that's on our drawing. We have the mitochondria. So these are our least complex levels of organization. Well, those organelles come together to create a cell, or to build up a cell, I should say. So cells are our building blocks of life. All living things are composed of cells. Now they can be one cell, which we call unicellular, or they can be made up of multiple cells, which is multicellular. So we are made up of multiple cells, so we are known as multicellular organisms. Now groups of similar cells come together and work together to compose tissues. So for example, let's say that the one cell we're looking at is a cardiac, which means heart, muscle, cell. So we know that the mitochondria creates energy. And let's say that that cell is using the energy, that muscle cell is using the energy that comes from the mitochondria. So the organelles build up cells. All right. Next up, tissues are composed of groups of similar cells that carry out a specific function. So if this is our muscle cell, if we have a lot of those cells coming together, that's going to be a tissue. Okay. Now, if we're keeping up with the cardiac muscle cells, if we have a group of cardiac muscle cells coming together, we're now going to call that a cardiac muscle tissue. And once again, all of these cells are the same, so they perform the same function, a specific function, right? Now let's say we get even more of those cardiac muscle cells or cardiac muscle tissues coming together. We're gonna get an organ. So an organ is composed of groups of similar tissues working together to carry out a specific function. So if we have a bunch of these tissues coming together, what do you think we're gonna form? We're gonna form the heart. So the organ we form is the heart. Now that is an atrocious heart, and I hope you know that that's not actually what your heart looks like. But for our example right now, that's the heart we're gonna look at. So a bunch of cardiac muscle tissues are going to compose the heart. And remember that that is once again carrying out a specific function. Okay, next up we've got organ systems. So organs build up organ systems. Organ systems are composed of groups of organs that work together to once again carry out a specific function. So the organ system that's made up of the heart is going to be called the circulatory system. Now we have many organ systems in our body. We've got our nervous system, we've got our digestive system. We're going to learn about those systems together. And finally, last but not least, our most complex level of organization is an organism. So an organism is composed of groups of organ systems that work together to carry out a specific function. Now, there are a few exceptions to this, including unicellular organisms like bacteria, but the organism is our most complex level of organization. Now, as I was going through this, I kept saying two words over and over and over, and I hope you caught on to that, and that is specific function. So the one catch to these levels of organization is that they are organized according to function. Okay. Now, I think that that's all I have for you today. Yes. So if you have any questions about this lesson, let me know. If you are good, you know the drill. Click on the exit ticket, answer the questions, and show me what you know. All right, have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon.